Hello, and we're back. Hi, Russ.
Greetings, Fractal University. With love, I welcome you, tribe. Today we are with Headmaster Dan Winter, and today's conversation is going to be about gravity for dummies or geniuses. Let's rock and roll.
Russ is there in the magic workshop near Torino where they make magic jewelry, Star Mother in the background. So Russ is in the alchemist laboratory. It's all
Yep.
good. So yeah, so we've been meditating on this for some time, and there's quite some controversy whether we should call this gravity for dummies or gravity for geniuses. And I think the way we might set the context here is: are you feeling attractive, or what makes anything attractive? You know, you would think, and we're going to put this together in terms of electrogravitics so that you see very practical examples of electric systems making gravity and understand for yourself how gravity is made. I mean, you would think the physicists would be embarrassed not having a clue why objects fall to the ground, but it's worse than that. The reason they don't have a clue why objects fall to the ground is because they don't know why any vortex gains energy during collapse. So that is the subtitle of today's conversation: gaining energy during collapse. Obviously, the universe is made of a single compressible substance, ether
Mhm.
sometimes. I call it the compressibility of a charge, which is a superfluid which inhabits all of space. And so obviously the only thing that actually exists in that superfluid of charge is when that charge rotates, it forms a vortex, string theory, a wormhole, and that vortex forms a
So
donut.
it's inertia. Inertia. We're talking
That's
about
right.
inertia right now.
Yes. So that when the charge begins to rotate and stores inertia, that's named mass. And also, because that charge is rotating, it has a period of rotation, the only origin and definition of time. So don't let them give you any of this crap about space-time is bent. It's crap. Actually, it's very simple. When charge moves down the vortex toward the center, the rate
Mhm.
of spin increases, and therefore time speeds up. Time being only and ever a simple name for rate of rotation. Only.
And with that, I want to add, there's a phrase, if you are having fun, time flies, correct?
Well,
So
especially as the spin density increases toward the center of the vortex, like the dervish spinning, trying to prove to his Sufi master that he has pure intention by not getting dizzy during the spin. We now know
mhm.
exactly the physics of how you don't get dizzy when you spin. It's the ability to focus on the center of the vortex.
So if we spin, if I spin very fast, but I keep my central thought clear, I won't get dizzy.
Exactly. And so that's why, and they actually are, there are articles in physics magazines about dervish turns and the physics of time. But
Mhm.
so it really is rather fundamental. So now all of that is simple and very clear. What's not clear then yet to apparently any physicist anywhere is what makes a vortex gain energy during collapse. Because if you knew what makes a vortex gain energy during collapse, named implosion, then you would know why anything is centripetal. And then you might know why gravity exists, why life force exists, why consciousness exists, why all negentropy exists. You cannot begin to have the conversation of why gravity exists, why life force exists, why consciousness exists, why negentropy and self-organization exist.
Then
You
what
can't.
is it? What is the answer for that mass that is needs to be created? Emotion?
Well, so we're visualizing a vortex now in a superfluid named charge, the ether. And for example, the top-down view of hydrogen, when we have the pictures in a minute, it's simply a golden ratio vortex. I proved that's how hydrogen is assembled. So visualize that golden ratio, literally golden ratio cone of vortices as the picture behind Russ. Thank you, Russ. Yes. So in that particular vortex, which I proved is the way hydrogen is built,
Hmm.
we need to know, why do you gain energy during collapse? If we knew that, then we could begin to know why gravity, life force, negentropy, consciousness, and all the fun stuff exists. So because physics, it has never occurred to anyone in physics that I know of that in a vortex you could gain energy during collapse. So once we answer the question of how you gain energy during collapse, then you can explain to Einstein, NASA, and Stephen Hawking why objects fall to the ground, because they don't know.
So through entropy, negentropy. So how do we gain the force through mass?
Which is to say, how do you increase the rate of spin, increase the centripetal force? Remember, it would appear that physics doesn't know why anything is centripetal. Electronegativity, for example. Nassim was actually correct that a negative ion is a small black hole. That's his language. It's actually a useful language, I think.
Yeah.
But has he or anyone answered what makes it centripetal? Hello? No, because in order to answer the question, what makes a negative ion or negative ion wind, hint, verify, what makes a negative ion a little black hole, you would need to know why it gains energy during charge collapse. So
I actually gained that knowledge from the Scorpio star correlate. That correlation really showed me it's
yeah, actually, being double Scorpio here, thank you, Russ. The angle of the scorpion's tail, apparently the delivery of sting requires gain energy during the collapse of the curvature on its tail, just like when you do the yoga and you do the spiral correctly, and then you feel a tingle in your finger when you made the spiral correctly, which it correctly called a quality of grace. and, and so again, it was about gaining energy during collapse. So now with that, we have the slideshow. Now this slideshow is related to what we prepared for the conference in Tours, France, with Elena Danan and the whole crew there. So there's French and English on some of these slides, meaning this is highly cultured. So remember, many philosophers agree that non-destructive self-reentry, here is a spiral in a vortex, forming a vortex, and the angle of the non-destructive self-reentry is a classic way to begin an explanation of what is consciousness. Consciousness is electrically, literally, the ability to non-destructively self-reenter. Hint, implode. Hint, gain energy during collapse. So many, philosophers already have discussed this in terms of consciousness is this ability to non-destructively self-reenter. And here is another example of a spiral non-destructively self-reenter, which is infinite non-destructive compression, Einstein's definition of gravity, and literally implosion. So we're going to take a new look at this optimized translation of vorticity, the only way for inertia in a line to be translated into a circle. Inertia in a line, basically energy, and when inertia goes in a circle, it stores inertia, and then it's called mass. So the difference between energy and mass is that L, or phase shift. So we're meditating on this question of how could compression become non-destructive, which is literally how Einstein articulated the problem he could not solve, which is that he knew non-destructive, infinite non-destructive compression was the solution of the unified field, but he didn't know what fractality or charge implosion, or didn't know how a vortex could gain energy during collapse. Now, interestingly, when Kepler, and indirectly Tycho Brahe, but especially Kepler, when he modeled the solar system, he actually said that the planetary orbitals were a nest of platonic solids. What he didn't say, but should have, is that a nest of platonic solids is the most elegant way to create golden ratio, and therefore charge implosion, and therefore gaining energy during charge collapse. So in effect, these people had intuited, but not understood, the actual physics of gravity. They were close. Even Poincaré here, he used a dodecahedron to model the symmetry of gravity in the plasma vortex. And as we said in the previous show here with Russell, and another show we did with, it was, yes, with Russell, it was an answer to Terence Howard, in which he was making a new atomic table. And we made the point that actually the atomic table is specifically, quite literally, electrically the symmetry of a nest of platonic solids. That's what the atomic table is. Whether you're talking about the electron orbitals, SPDF, the s orbital, a donut, the pi suborbital, a tetracube, and the DNF suborbital, dodecaecosa, 5-7 vortex pair, 10-14 electrons. So we know when we can prove that actually your chemistry teacher made a mistake to never tell you that the atomic table is simply the way you nest platonic solids. That's what it is electrically, whether you're talking about the electron shells or whether you're talking about the nucleus, tetracube, octaecosa, being every nest of nuclear hadrons, the chemist moon. So once you understand,
those are the sequences. Those are the sequences. What Fractal University needs to know is that this is what you envision. This is what you see in your frontal cortex.
Right. You actually, if your chemistry teacher deprived you of psychokinesis by never telling you the atomic table is only a nest of platonic solids, that's what holds it together. That's what makes it centripetal. That's what makes the gravity at the middle. And that is the only definition of alchemy, which is literally only non-destructive charge collapse. So this is review. We want to get to the specific examples then of how we electrically understand electrogravitics elegantly by understanding just this principle. So in this particular slideshow, we used the physics of black holes and introduced the physics of stargates and portals. Remember, Jean-Charles Moyen had teleported many times. And so we were talking about the biggest stargate in our galaxy, the Orion cubic trapezium, that when you conjugate lasers into a cube, you make phase conjugation. And that is how you arrange masses to make stargates, in this case, the biggest stargate in our galaxy.
Just so we don't lose anybody that doesn't understand what it means for John Charles Moyen to implode or have this type of experience where he can locate himself in different parts of, we'll say, physicality. This is what you need to look at. This is what you need to think of. And this is how you will understand on a higher frequency how to do this and how it happens.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, so this actual lecture series for the tours event with Jean Charles and Elena began here when we measured, with Jean Charles' help, just before he teleported repeatedly with witnesses and came back with sand between his toes from the beach. We measured his brainwaves here and the alpha to gamma cascade in his brainwaves here, made this cascade here. This is the cascade you get in your brainwaves at very high amplitudes just before teleporting. And what happened is your brain is actually imploding and embedding you into the array. It's called the longitudinal EMF coherence array, which is the physics of stargates. So that's the background of this conversation. We're beginning to understand that imploding into the longitudinal array is the reason gravity exists and is also then the reason stargates and portals exist. So this was how and by the way, the amplitude, the coherence of his brainwaves just before these incredible implosion events was off the charts. So we were looking at when politically in galaxies like ours, when, for example, Pleiades, Orion, and Sirius are arranged in the 60-degree implosion cone, just like this, you get this light cone. And that's actually the beginning of the physics of stargates and portals. And so you can actually begin to understand that what happens is the charge is imploded, compressed into the longitudinal node at the Planck threshold. And then that implosive compression is distributed into an array of longitudinal coherence. That longitudinal coherence EMF propagation directionally being the definition of gravity waves, as Tom Bearden proved in gravitobiology. So, you know, the ancient Japanese woodcut of the masses of the Stargate of Orion as being a double light cone vortex now makes a lot more sense, literally Yod, He, Vohe, two opposing light cones, sometimes called Yahweh, or the Antarian conversion.
The breath, Yahweh, Vorhe, Yahweh, Ah, Hey. Yeah.
So you nest the two opposing vortex and you get creation. So that was background. But now we want to get very specific. The core of today's lecture is right here. In order to understand why gravity and anything centripetal exists, you need to understand for yourself electrically why a water vortex can make voltage from gravity and can make gravity. If you understand that at the end of this lecture, I have succeeded. If you don't understand, then I have failed today. Okay, so we're asking, please, visualize this vortex. You can call it Schauberger, you can call it repulsing, you can call it water implosion, you can call it anything you want. But you need to be able to visualize this vortex and understand why and under what circumstances you will make gravity and make voltage from gravity with just a water vortex, as Schauberger obviously succeeded many times. So the point is that first of all, the water vortex that makes gravity and makes power from gravity has to be a relatively highly charged water, rather pure, but it needs to be what's called piezoelectric, which means dissolved mineral, making it conductive piezoelectric. And therefore, when the water is piezoelectric, then in the translation of vorticity at the center of the vortex, if the angle is correct, the transverse EMF will be converted to longitudinal at the point of the vortex, spit out coherent longitudinal compressional waves converted from the up and down transverse. So the transverse waves are going like this, perpendicular to the direction of motion of the wave. But in the longitudinal wave that's squirted out the center of the nozzle of that squirt gun, the charge inertia is traveling, the axis of compression, reciprocation, is parallel to the direction of propagation of the wave, called longitudinal or scalar. And that compressional wave can carry the inertia, literally stand on its head, I mean become, as Tom Bearden indicated, the definition of all gravity waves. So whether you're visualizing a simple Schauberger vortex or whether you're visualizing what Schauberger called the repulsing, if you see right here, this little heart shape, Valentine, it's the whole goal of arranging this vortex after the water is piezo is to get to the angle of the convergence of the implosion point at the center of that vortex related to 60 degree to be implosive in such that then the transverse EMF is squeezed down the light cone and squirts out the nozzle of the squirt gun, a coherent longitudinal directional vector, namely a gravity wave.
So if we can, how would we compress that to somebody that doesn't know? So that compression point, the heart, the Valentine, is the love note, right? That's the moment. That's the moment between the time you start crying, you have the thought, and the time you start crying. Right there, that shift.
The crying moment is when you feel the inertia because you've had a pure intention, your eureka moment, and the whole universe wants to fall into you at the moment you become a shareable wave, because the waves are smart. They don't want to die. So if somebody's angry, that's called a non-shareable wave. And so the universe will not be attractive. But if you want to be attractive, then you have to think shareable thoughts.
Right. Have the what do they call it now? It's testosterone to estrogen, the feminine to masculine. It's being able to balance that same fluid within your body.
I mean, it is about a superfluid. And whether you call it masculine or feminine, centripetal, centrifugal, the issue is what becomes centripetal is the fact that when the waves converge at center, there is so much symmetry called being a shareable wave, otherwise known as pure intention, which we now know is measurable, second order EKG power spectrum in the heart being truly an electrical lie detector. So at the onset of pure intention, this implosion is perfected, and the body then can embed in the gravitational array of coherent longitudinal nodes, which looks like this, sometimes called the collective unconscious or ancestor memory or successful death. So if you can't compress well, it ain't gonna work. But so we're trying to focus here on visualizing practically how we're going to apply our new understanding of electrogravitics, because as Einstein said, there needs to be a way out at center for a charge, otherwise charge implosion named gravity can't exist. What he didn't know was when waves converge with the right compression at the Planck threshold, that conversion to longitudinal means they can then be distributed faster than the speed of light by golden ratio multiples times the speed of light into the array called the gravity grid. The reason all planetary orbitals are basically based on golden ratio. At least golden ratio is probably the dominant geometry of all orbital mechanics. That is a smoking gun because the longitudinal array can only distribute in that way a fractal efficiency. So to find a way into that array means implosive compression and many examples. And here you can actually almost see where you get that heart shape at that implosive moment in the repulsing. So here we actually built, we wound coils toroidally, and if the angle of the wrap of that winding on that coil is correct, you make a small amount of gravity, and we have some slides. That's all at fractalfield.com/propulsion, and you can see how we made gravity using simply water and toroidal coil winds. Basically, because we were gaining energy during charge collapse. That's how we made gravity. So this is the Hanabu. So the other little secret about the Hanabu here is that a water vortex piezo alone makes a relatively small amount of gravity. However, if you take a mercury vortex, much higher specific gravity mass in the liquid, and then you add a trace amount of iron powder, making it red mercury, making it magnetically flux conductive. And then you add a small amount of low-grade radioactivity, making it a quasi-superconductor, as in the Paul Brown nuclear battery, which is what the Nazis did. So that's how the mercury vortex worked for the Nazis, actually, and then the Nazi Dark Fleet used that to make a base on the Moon and Mars before they kicked them the hell out of here, the Federation. And now they're hiding back in Aldebaran with the Greys. So, yeah. Anyway, but the point is not to review the history here. The point is for you to know for yourself the physics of why it is a vortex can make gravity. That's why we're here today. So now I would like you to visualize this relatively accurately if you could, because then you will absolutely know what NASA doesn't. Here is a picture of the side view of what's called the EM drive, the electromagnetic drive. It's a trapezoid into which you lock a standing wave of microwave, which looks like this. Now, if they knew, but they don't, that if you tuned that microwave to my equation called PlanckFire.com, you would make more gravity because the vortex cascade of that microwave going to that phase conjugate fractal implosion point, or at the idealized point of max implosive compression, there is then distribution into the array, spitting out coherent longitudinal electromagnetic directionally. You can optimize the amount of gravity you make in electrogravitics, the EM drive being an example, after you understand PlanckFire.com, PlanckPhire, PlanckFire.com, which is simple. You take Planck and multiply by powers of golden ratio, fractality conjugation. Perfected. Yes, Russ.
Yes. Okay. So to sum it down in layman's terms for somebody that doesn't understand, that this sequence right here is what Dan has answered, which Tesla didn't have the time to do it. Einstein also had his momentary. This is the sequence or the curve for the engine, the combustion.
This is a pure solid state electrogravitic wave.
And people with microwaves, people are using microwaves, not understanding that this, what is inside that microwave, and they're just using it from their ear, like, okay, I'll buy a microwave because it's easier, and they're getting a different frequency, which
yeah, the microwave cooking in general is really bad news. It doesn't mean microwave is evil, but this body is using microwave for bliss, so you don't want to mess with it for your cooking because it'll mess with your bliss. Is a short summary. But the point is you can phase conjugate microwave to implode and make gravity and optimize electrogravitics only after you understand PlanckFire.com, because that implosion spits out the longitudinal directly when it's tuned accurately to Planck threshold. So that's And this was just that you stabilize local gravity by embedding the local spin into a zodiacal spin. And we understand a lot more now, thanks to Cruttenden, about the physics of precession. And we have an article on that. but we're not going to go into precession now. But precession is more like 24,000, not 26,000. Cruttenden is right, and conventional astrophysics is wrong. Precession is not 26,000 years. Tell them they're dumb. It's because the rate of precession changes over time, and so they thought it was slow at 26, but now it's actually 24. And PlanckFire.com predicts 24,300 years. So we understand now precession much better and how that stabilizes gravity by imploding Planck fire at a distance. So this is now the next. So that kind of propulsion down the vortex is what was called what was called impulse power in Star Trek. So the impulse power is literally a Mercury vortex. It's one example of impulse power because the impulse is converted from transverse to longitudinal or a gravity wave. That's why it's literally called impulse. Now, what's called warp power in Star Trek is here. This is the end of the piezo fire crystal. It could be, they called it the dilithium in Star Trek, but actually the correct term there would be either lithium niobate or other types of optimized piezo crystal, the Koski frost being the classic example of this. And this is Elizabeth Bill Donovan's book called Glimpses of Epiphany. And at fractalfield.com/propulsion, you can download and read that whole book. The government actually stole the Koski frost documentation out of every university library in America, we believe, because it revealed the physics of warp propulsion. Here's a crystal. You put a phase conjugate pump wave cascade into that crystal, and you make 800 times its own weight in gravity. First, it would implode and shrink, of course. So this is the book Glimpses of Epiphany. But the point is that if you visualize what's happening in that crystal, and we're going to use Vogel as an example. So the Z-axis helix of that SiO2, silicon dioxide tetracubic helix, Y quartz is piezo, means that when you pump this, here's a phase conjugate pump wave, into that crystal, it would then implode and gain energy during collapse. This is the classic phase conjugate pump wave. Now, of course, Marcel Vogel didn't know what a phase conjugate pump wave was at the time, but he knew that when he pointed his crystal at the plant polygraph, it would work only if he breathed into a phase conjugate pump wave. Literally, his breath and his own bliss mechanics, I mean, literally his own spine liquid pump harmonics right here, the only definition of Kundalini, is literally what pumped that crystal and how he controlled the plant polygraph at a distance with our group in Toronto. I was there. So the point is what makes the crystal make gravity and implode, and then you can squirt a longitudinal wave out the z-axis of that crystal, and you can heal water and do all kinds of magic stuff. And we're explaining.
So as a secret, that's the crystal, yeah.
Well, yeah. So because he didn't understand how phase conjugation could be made sustainably, he had the sides of the crystal be concave or convex, as you see it here, to crudely approximate a phase conjugate pump wave. However, if you look at the history of all the accurate fire crystals, .com, PHIRE, firecrystal.com. All the fire crystals in history, the actual sides of the crystals here in the Excelsior or here in Koski Frost, the sides of the crystals are actually parallel, but you can only sustain the implosion and the phase conjugate pump wave in those crystals if the sides are parallel. Now, if the sides are not parallel, you can approximate, but you cannot sustain accurately. But when the sides do approximate phase conjugation, then you don't have to have use your own bliss to actually be the phase conjugate pump wave.
Yeah.
But the actual correct phase conjugate pump wave is PlanckFire.com as implemented at flameinmind.com/flameandsound. So the same audio driver we use for all of our technology, Therify, Quantify, Plasma Fire, PiezoFire.com, is that same perfected phase conjugate pump wave, the complex wave that's required to drive a crystal to spit out coherent longitudinal. So another variable in, Elena is talking about how the platforms floating in the clouds of Jupiter, Saturn, they actually float. And here you see the unobtainium in the movie Avatar floating. And here you see Grebennikov floating on his insect skeletons. The insect skeletons have what's called the cavity structure effect, which is You see the geometry of those cavities? Remember, this insect skeleton remain is the angle of the cone in the cavities is fractal conic.
Wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is actually a picture of the beetles, the Egyptian beetles, wings upside down. This is what we're showing right now.
Yeah, but remember here, if you see on the right that
Mhm.
first of all, remember that the insect skeletons are a super dielectric. That's the key. After a
Right.
couple billion years, insects knew that if you want to make gravity,
Hmm,
your
hmm.
skeleton better be a super dielectric, like the postmen in Tibet would float because their bones became a super dielectric.
Right. The
So
geometry of this the structure.
yeah, it's called cavity structure effect. But note if you zoom in on the structure of the cavity, it's a vortex. So now I got a
Hmm.
super dielectric implosive capacitance, means
Yeah.
perfected charge distribution. And now it's in an implosive cone called a cavity structure effect. And suddenly he steps on this box full of these insect skeletons and he's flying around. There's hundreds of videos, man. This guy was floating all the time. Gravenikov. And you can see all the pictures at goldenmean.info/gravity politics. So this is another example. You implode that capacitance down that cone and spit out a longitudinal at the center of that vortex right there.
This
And you
is so
make
amazing. This is
and
so
you
amazing. People are still using these scooters all around town when we got this technology already known.
and you make gravity. Absolutely. So what, but you need to understand supercapacitance, you need to super dielectric and cavity structure effect. Literally fractal attractors. So let's I'm going to turn this now. Yeah. So this is just about the proof that the golden ratio is the dominant geometry of orbital mechanics, and therefore how gravity is stabilized and atmosphere is maintained from spirosolaris.ca. So no scientist could deny that golden ratio is dominant geometry of most orbital mechanics, including the dodeca geometry of the universe and the Earth grid and the fractality of the galaxy. So this is just reviewing that all the major science have already agreed that charge collapse causes gravity and consciousness. The little problem they didn't figure out is what causes charge collapse, which is what we have just answered. Okay, stop the screen share.
Hmm.
So was that a happily ever after? Well, I just ask you, if you visualize that vortex in your mind right now, which by the way, that vortex is literally the only definition and topologic description of your consciousness. The consciousness that exists in your synaptic array now is a vortex. That's what it is. And you can take it with you when you dream and when you die
Hmm.
if the vortex is implosive, if it's gaining energy during charge collapse. So the reason that Jean-Charles Moyen's brainwaves made massive alpha to gamma golden ratio octave cascades because the fingers squeezing that vortex to a point became very coherent and the vortex got implosively squeezed to a point. And when that happens, you can lucid dream, and that's called getting a soul and taking memory through death. This is not subjective. It's not mystical. It's not a big mystery. No, we know exactly what your consciousness is. We know exactly how you get a soul. We know exactly how you take memory through death. It's called longitudinal coherence. And we better get with the program here because right now our species is looking not able to achieve the kind of immortality and soul we need because our kids are not being properly taught. And that's why we're here. What do you think, Russ?
I think yeah. The civilization is pretty iffy right now, and with Trump and Biden's elections going on right now, and everything that's happening around the world, we need to concentrate on how to become stronger. And this visualization, I think, is the key to achieve the energy which we wish to project.
Yeah. But let's just review, have we been clear enough? So remember that vortex forms accurately toward implosion because of golden ratio harmonics. Golden ratio harmonics allow recursive adding and multiplying of the phase velocities, not just the wavelength, but the phase velocities. And when the phase velocities add and multiply recursively constructively, that turns compression into acceleration toward center, named the gravity, named gaining energy during charge collapse. So now that you know how you gain energy during charge collapse, because golden ratio enables that implosion, then you can answer why gravity exists, why life force exists, why consciousness exists, why all negentropy exists. For example, a seed germinates better if you put it in an implosion field. People heal when they go in an implosion field because when you gain energy during charge collapse, only the shareable wave survives compression through center, and that's called self-organization or negentropy, literally the origin of negentropy. So you see why we wanted you personally to understand whether it's a water vortex, a mercury vortex, or electrogravitics, or the EM drive, or the floating insect skeletons, the 1,000,000,000 ways you can make gravity electrically. It's always going to be a mystery to you. You're always going to be disempowered until you know how you gain energy during charge collapse. When Valerie woke up and her favorite saint grandmother was floating, the ladies there, she's a saint, she's amazing.
Mhm.
There's lots of documentation. The saints float all the time. It's called paying your debt to gravity. Well, how did they float? They gained energy during charge collapse. The TM people, they float under the gold domes. You know why they float during meditating better under gold domes? Because gold domes are implosive capacitance, enabling you to gain energy during charge collapse. Okay, have I said that too much? Yes.
So how I want to in layman's terms for the people. I understand what you were saying in terms of the vortex until the collapse and holding that collapse in that moment of love, right? So if I have an emotion, my emotion starts spinning, the weather starts changing, and when I can hold that thought, concentrate on a sequence, which this is what we're going to be getting to in further episodes, uh, when I can hold that sequence and hold that thought of pure love until the compression, and then start buzzing like a bee, that is the
Yeah, the tricky point. And it reminds me of the biophysics of Kundalini that we've been teaching for 30 years, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. We showed by measurement that those low frequencies in the spine liquid pump called the sacrocranial tidals, the only
Mhm.
physics of Kundalini, the cascade of low frequency harmonics, we just had the slide up here, goldenmean.info/Kundalini. The low frequency of the spine liquid pump, the sacrocranial is the HRV, the Mayer wave, it's literally the wave of your breath. So your spine liquid harmonics are exactly doing plankfire.com. And what you're feeling is lightening up your tailbone. And then you have this massive explosion. This is the physics of Kundalini. And as Russ is saying, how do you sit there and inhabit that lightning bolt? The psychology of that is what Russ is pointing to very usefully here. In other words, as that lightning bolt increases in density up your tailbone and then out your crown chakra, you can only remain in the center of that lightning bolt if every thought is only pure principle. Every thought is only the kind of eureka that serves all of consciousness. It's exactly like the physics of successful death. You can't gain the inertia to propagate into that array, gravity array, collective unconscious, communion of saints, unless you can remain just like the dervish turning at the center of the vortex. So gradually you're refining your ability, your mentation, to remain at the center of the vortex and inhabit a larger and larger bolt of lightning, which is literally a longer wave braided on a longer wave, braided on a longer wave. The only definition of going to the next dimension, by the way.
Mhm.
So that ability to remain at the center of the vortex as the implosion happens inside your body, the only physics of pure intention actually is massive, massive phase coherence, which is identical with the measurement of pure intention, as we prove by measurement, realheartcoherence.com. You can measure onset of heart coherence, and it's a very functional lie detector for exactly this reason.
Mhm. Mhm. Powerful stuff, and we are going to be moving through these realms with power and understanding. So,
Yes. And so in next conversations, we're going to talk more about the electrical nature of environments that enable this kind of bliss process, the electrical nature of bliss itself, Kundalini and bliss activities and hygiene, etc.
sequences.
Embedding upon embedding, the braid on the braid of the braid imploding.
Yeah.
But for today, Do you now understand that you can visualize for yourself how any vortex can gain energy during collapse? If you can visualize and understand that for yourself, the vortex harmonic tensors line up to golden ratio, implosion begins, and it gains energy during collapse. Now you can know for the first time why objects fall to the ground. Remember, focused human intention is measurably electrically centripetal. Who's the first person ever to explain why? Me. Okay. And we now know you make a centripetal electric field, you can cause a seed to grow. You make an electrical field centripetal, like installing natural lighting instead of poison fluorescent lighting, and you measure the increase in attention span in your child's classroom. In other words, you can make attention if you understand the electric field that causes attention, which, by the way, is the opposite of the electrosmog shit that our kids are inhabiting every day in their classrooms today, because they don't know what attention is. This is not good.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay.
Too much of the phone and too much of not being able to have their concentration aligned is.
I mean, even in Finland, where half the class is outside, they're all barefoot, and the academic scores went off the charts way up. They got grounding. At least they realized, oh, you put the kids in nature, you can create attention electrically. Hello. What are we doing wrong with our kids in these thick, shitty sneakers in electrosmog hell? And we call that a classroom. It's soullessness. This is a problem. Okay, I have carried on. I think that was that a happily ever after?
That's a happily ever after. That's a happily ever after. Fractal You, Fractal Luna, plonkfire.com. I love you all. Thank you for sharing this moment with us.
Let's be a shareable wave. Thanks, guys. Blessings. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.